challenge of dealing with these obfuscation issues and be more effective at getting our message internally transferred so that we aren't dealing with doubt having the majority?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I don't have a satisfactory answer to it. I've been asked that question before and I've thought about it. One of the interesting things about the scientific community is that, somebody like Bill Nierenberg or Fred Singer can say really quite outrageous things. They can launch quite outrageous attacks on fellow scientists, as we show in the book they did. And scientists will be upset by it. They'll be distressed by it, but by and large, they won't really do anything about it. They'll say, well, he's entitled to his opinion. I don't like it. I don't agree. There's no excommunication in the scientific community. There's no de-licensing, right? You can't, if you're a lawyer or a doctor, you can lose your license. But there is no license to be a scientist. So it's very difficult because I don't think the scientific community wants to be in the business of excommunicating people. I don't think that would be helpful. And yet, it is very problematic when people are saying things that are known to be false, doing things that are quite unprincipled, making accusations, like we talk in the book, we have a whole section about what happened to Ben Santer, making accusations that are false. It's very hard to know what to do about that. But I do think that the scientific communities collectively should be having a conversation about this issue. And maybe it's simply a matter of speaking up. Maybe it's simply a matter of saying, look, Fred Singer is entitled to his opinion. It's a free country. He can say what he wants. But that view is inconsistent with what we know from 100 years of scientific data. And just to be a little bit more willing to stand up and be counted and to say that kind of thing in public, I think that, at least in some cases, that would be helpful.
Okay, one last question. Gentleman in the white shirt.
Is there any situation in history, through history, in which this strategy of over-communicating about the uncertainty so failed? In other words, is there any hope is there any situation in which this strategy failed earlier? So like we have seen it came to fail for tobacco and the others, but after many decades, any situation in which it failed after only a few years?
Yeah. Well, it's a very difficult question to say, well, what do we do now that, the last 20 or 30 years of efforts have failed? And of course, there are some people who have said, well, we failed to mitigate greenhouse gases, so now we just have to adapt to it. I certainly reject that argument. I think that's actually a very ignorant thing for people to say, because if we don't mitigate greenhouse gases, we're going to be looking at changes that I don't think there is any meaningful way in which we actually can adapt to. I think we'll be looking at colossal losses. We'll be looking at colossal losses of biodiversity, significant loss of human life, and tremendous loss of infrastructure close to sea level, trillions of dollars of vulnerable infrastructure at or near sea level, enormous cultural resources at or near sea level, places like Venice or the Keys, the Florida Keys. So I think we're all going to become a whole lot poorer if we don't do something very quickly. So I think that time is starting to run out. I think the scientific community has not conveyed a sense of urgency about this matter. I think it's hard for scientists to convey urgency because it's so much part of the culture of science not to be emotional and not to be dramatic and not to be hysterical. So scientists feel it's extremely important to stay calm, be very neutral, talk about watts per meter squared and forcing functions and all that good scientific stuff. But that doesn't really convey a sense of urgency. When Jim Hansen says, well, Jim Hansen is getting kind of urgent now. He's a very frustrated man, right? But, when scientists talk about increasing the heat load on the atmosphere by 2 watts per meter squared, that just doesn't mean anything to most people. So I think we need to convey a greater sense of urgency. I think we need to communicate about impacts in ways that people understand by talking about the impacts in the place where you live, whether it's pine bark beetles in BC, or sea level rise in La Jolla, or hurricanes in the Gulf Coast, or fires in New Mexico that are right now threatening the Los Alamos National Laboratory. Different things are happening in different places, and when I go around traveling, if the question of impacts come up, I try to talk about impacts that are either already occurring or highly likely to occur in that place as much as possible. And then I think the other thing we have to say is there is a moral dimension to this. There is a dimension of ethics and justice. So, when I hear people say, well, we've tried for 20 years to control emissions through emissions trading and that's failed, so therefore we need to give up. Well, to me that would be like saying we've tried for, saying in 1830, we've tried for 100 years to eliminate slavery and we failed, so we have to give up. I just think that that's